This is part 5 of the Kyosho Lazer ZXS Evolution rebuild slash restoration series. As you can see from the last time, I do have the front and rear suspension arms mounted with all the linkages connected, and the hub carriers and the universals mounted. Now there's a few things to note here with getting this all done. So on the rear, let me start with the sway bar. So this is a replacement sway bar because the old one is all scratched up. I think I pointed that out in the last video. This linkage here, I used a Lunsford 32 millimeter long turnbuckle with the Kyosho short ball ends on either side. And this gets you, if you tighten it down all the way, almost the exact same length as the stock sort of single piece unit that would act as this connection. The reason why I'm not using those is I simply don't have them for this specific car that I bought. They didn't, the guy didn't, have them. And you can get replacement units for that by ordering the full sway bar kit for either of the re-released Optima or Ultima. And that's like a $25 set, something like that. So it's basically the front and rear sway bar plus all the mounting equipment, which includes those units. But I'm not going to spend $25 on that. That's a little silly, especially since it would come a lot of parts that I wouldn't use. So I just use a titanium turnbuckle here with these short rod ends. I do have to get more of these as I ran out of the short ends. So the other side right now is not connected, but I'll do that in time. The rear hub carriers, these are from 3 Racing. They're aluminum rear hub carriers for the RB5 and ZX5. Basically from the ZXS Evolution onwards, and from the RB Type R, so their two-wheel drive buggy, onwards, they use the same type of rear hub carrier design as even the modern Lazers and Ultimas. The only difference is for these, let me see if I have it here, or did I put it already in a bin? Yeah, so the original units, they have 3 holes here. This one has 2 holes, so just the upper 2. But the stock instructions, or the stock build, calls for using the middle hole here, which would be the bottom hole on this one. If you go lower in holes, basically that pushes the hub carrier up, which pushes the chassis down. So you would want to use something like that for like a really high grip track like AstroTurf or something, which I have no intention of doing. And anyway, I like the alloy part. It looks nice. So that's what I did on the rear here. Installing the hinge pin here, you can see there's this little, I forget what this is called, but it's like a little sleeve with a grub screw that basically tightens down on this hinge pin, because this hinge pin goes into this rear mount, or this front rear mount, or I guess you call it a rear front mount here, and it goes through this plate, but there's nothing holding it on this side of the plate. Like with the Inferno 10, for example, which I actually have right here. See, on the rear of the Inferno 10, this hinge pin, it's kind of slotted, or it's flat, and that way you slot this in through the back all the way through, and then this catches on this plate, so it doesn't actually, it can't completely go through. But on the ZXS Evo, it's a uniform hinge pin. So this could slide in and out theoretically. Okay, so that's why you put this in here. This is the Fiberlight part for this. I did have to, I believe, drill these holes out just a little bit to help these hinge pins slot through. Otherwise it was too tight, I couldn't even get it in. And I had to do the same thing, by the way, for the front unit as well. The holes for the hinge pins were a little too small. So moving on to the front, we have with the front arms is that you can't really see it too well here, but there's a tiny little washer you got to put in there. Make sure you put that in. And then for the setup here, what did I do? Well, one thing to note is with the upper arm, you use a 20 millimeter turnbuckle, and the manual calls for the long ball end, but I ended up using the medium ball end because the long one was too long, and I think that's because with the original turnbuckle that you would have here instead of the Lunsford unit, the actual nut for this is much more narrow. And so you can get to a smaller gap with this, between this upper arm and this ball end with the stock turnbuckle. And that allows you to use a longer ball end here and thread it in further to get the right distance. But with the Lunsford units, because you have to put an adjustment wrench in there, right, this has a minimum width that you can allow for a gap opening. So to accommodate that, you have to use a smaller ball end on this side. Okay, no big deal. The other thing here is my choice for the caster block. So the stock caster block is this guy here. Okay, and in theory, there's nothing really wrong with this, but the way that the manual has you assemble this setup here, let me get to that part of the build. That would be here. So the way this goes together, I'm not too crazy about. So why is that? Well, first off, as you can see on the bottom part here of this caster block is a little bit thinner than on the sort of interior of this caster block. And what happens is you put this sleeved kingpin screw through. It's really like a nut because it has a hex nut head. Anyway, that goes through. Then you put a 1 millimeter plastic spacer on the bottom, and then you put the steering block on top of that, and you screw it in that way. The thing is, the choice of kingpin that you use here, and with the thickness of this caster block here, even after adding the spacer, it leaves a gap. So by the time this screw thread is fully bottomed out inside the steering block, there's still a spacing between this caster block surface and the sort of nut head of this kingpin. And, generally when you put steering assemblies together, you want that all to close up so that way no dirt gets in there or anything. So I didn't particularly like that. And I fiddled around a lot with different ways of assembling this. Likewise for the top, you got to put some spacers on the inside, and then these here, they go on the outside to screw in. And I actually didn't have all of the exact type of spacer I would need. So that was another reason why I went with this, because it's a slightly different setup. So I decided to just forego this caster block and use the stock steering knuckle, because that's the same as you have on the other Lazers. But to make this fit with the Team C-Line caster block, it's a thicker bottom. So this kingpin fits perfectly, and it screws in nice and flush with the bearing that mounts to the bottom side of this caster block. So it's a perfect fit. And there are no spacers above or below, which presumably the reason why you have spacers in here with this setup is because you can adjust it, I suppose, if you really wanted to. Here it's not, but this is a very, very, very strong caster block. I use this on my Lazer ZX-RR runner. So I figured I'd do it here. And then, to make the top section work, it is a different setup. As you can see, I'm not using this ball stud here. If you did use this, because this sleeve part is so long, you need to put about a 3 millimeter amount of spacer under this on the outside. So you need a 4 millimeter inner diameter and a 3 millimeter thick, or like, 3 ones, or what is it, a 1 and a 2 or whatever, to get that to the right height, so that when this screws in, it doesn't leave a gap to the top. So what you end up doing is there's a separate sleeved screw, which I think you use on the stock or the older ZX and ZXR builds with the different front upper arm setup, to allow you to screw into this threaded sleeve that slots into this bearing, and then it goes down. And so here I have a 4.8 millimeter ball stud with a 10 millimeter thread that allows me to get through all of this and then down adequately deep into the steering block, so that way it all fits nice and snug. And when you tighten it all the way, it doesn't bind or anything like that. The only problem, my only worry here is that this ball stud is aluminum. So if I were to run this and this got a hard impact, this could snap. As long as it snaps in a way that I can take it off, I'm not too worried. But that could be a potential weak point. Let's see. And I did order a set of Jazz Rider aluminum front steering knuckles. So my choice of these stock units is just temporary. I am going to replace these with the Jazz Rider units, just as I have here, right, on the Inferno 10 and on the Lazer ZXRR. Same setup. It's aluminum, it's stronger, and it also looks pretty decent. Let's see. One thing that does occur to me here is that the amount of droop that you can achieve is somewhat dependent on this knuckle here, and it's possible that I put these on the wrong way. So this is the left knuckle and that's the right knuckle, and I put it on with the letter facing the top. The thing is, in the manual it doesn't tell you whether the letter should face up or down, although I do believe, to my memory, in the old Lazer ZXR and ZXRR manuals, the right hand, the one with the letter R on it, has to go upside down to the left side. So I very likely made a mistake there. But I'll rectify that once I, later on when I get the aluminum parts, or maybe I'll do this after this video. Whatever. Let's see. Anything else that comes to mind at the moment? What I'm thinking of doing, because all that's really next is, a few little tweaks here on with like this mount on the other side, and I got to mount the slipper clutch and the spur gear, no big deal. Like little things like that. Fix the steering blocks and then do the shocks, and this is basically done. For the actual wheel hexes, I do have a set of, I think they're Yokomo OT8. So they're basically Yokomo wheel hubs that are designed to fit on the Optima and Lazer universal joints, because these have a tapered wheel axle very similar to the Schumacher Cat. And I just think it would look cool to have Yokomo style wheels on this. So I'm considering doing that. If not that, then I might get A&L makes wheel hexes with I think a plus 6mm offset. So you can essentially allows you to put modern wheels on the car and get the correct width. Or to just run it wider if you want to with the stock wheels. So I'm still kind of going back and forth on what I want to do there. Whether or not I'm going to actually run this, I know that was the original plan. I'm unsure, and that's because there are various parts of this build that suggest a certain level of fragility compared to the ZXR, the ZXRR, that I'm not sure I would want to tolerate. And as far as fixing this goes, even with all the 3D printed parts that I have enabled, I'm not sure that I would want to have to service this thing, because getting to the belts is in some ways easier. Like on the front gearbox it's easier, but on the rear gearbox it's a lot harder than on the older Lazers. So I'm kind of up in the air as to whether I want to make this my let's say premier runner for the 10.5 turn four-wheel drive buggy class of the Vintage Nationals. I'm kind of leaning more towards either the Inferno 10 or my YZ10, which is kind of tried and true and very reliable. So, again, that's something I'll figure out later. But this is where we are. So far, it looks pretty nice. It does look like a cool buggy. But as you build through it, the mystique of these things kind of wears off. So, yeah, anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for watching.